So Josh, you just said something to me, and I want you to actually say it on air, and I want to then have a chance to defend myself. And then David, I'm going to ask you about the tax code, and maybe we'll go to you in response to this as well. What were you saying, Josh?
I'm sorry. Which thing that I was saying?
You were saying you basically said why are we if you agree that taxes are going to have to go up on everyone, then why are you spending the first 2 blocks of your show on your progressive program talking about this fairness question?
Right, and I think the president has spent the first 3 years of his administration having this conversation, where essentially he's saying to people, the government will do more for you, and don't worry, somebody else will pay for it. And now you can make the tax code somewhat more progressive, but to pay for all the things the government does today, let alone new programs, you're going to need new tax money from everybody. And I don't think liberals are making the case that government is worth paying more in taxes.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. David, when we talk about the state of the tax code and all the combined trends that I discussed at the beginning in terms of the decline of the top marginal rate, the decline of the capital gains rate, the decline of the average corporate tax rate, the decline of the effective rate for people making lots of money, the carried interest loophole, all these things that in tandem and together represent a tremendous lack of equity in the system. What is your short story to someone who lands here from another planet about why the tax code is the way it is?
Well, I actually give a lecture where I imagine I'm a cosmic journalist visiting Earth, and my first report back about economics is that it's very clear that what people love more than anything is taxes, because it's about 40% of the world economy. They must love taxes if it's such a large share. But in those countries that have the highest and most rigorous tax systems, they have the most civilization, the least violence, the fewest divorces, the best adjusted societies. In the United States, however, the dominant country economically, they have this curious policy where they tell people that people at the top pay this heavy tax burden, when in fact the system actually redistributes upward to the very, very super wealthy. And why do people not see this? Because the class that we're all in of prosperous people are very heavily taxed, and it's hard for us to imagine that people way above us pay very small tax, and in some cases no tax at all, because Congress allows it.
Why does Congress allow it, though? That is the fundamental question.
I disagree with Josh on one point.
Please.
I disagree with Josh on one point.
Please.
People who are out of work paid for their benefits.
You're saying in terms of unemployment?
They paid a tax. It's on your paycheck.
Yes.
That's exactly right. They paid for those benefits. Yeah. They didn't cause this problem. They shouldn't be punished by the people who made money off it through their government.
Right, and they purchase. And the way that we should be clear, the way that the reason it's called unemployment insurance is because it's insurance. You pay a premium when you're working, and then you collect the benefits when the event happens, as if a fire took your house. But why is it the case that, I mean, why do we have such a hard time? Why do we have such a hard time translating common sense or basic values of equity, or even being able to integrate Rupert Murdoch, Josh Barro, David Frum, and everyone else's idea that we should get rid of the carried interest loophole? Why do we have such a hard time making that actually happen? Because that seems to me, in some ways, the bigger issue, right? We have to figure out what are the actual mechanics that are preventing us from achieving good tax policy.
In a lot of ways, it's because the right wing has laid down this narrative that taxes are always increasing. And when you look at surveys, American people say taxes are higher than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. You ask Republican candidates like Michelle Bachmann about tax codes, and they say they want to go back to the Reagan tax code, which would be great,
right?
Because that's actually higher. It's more progressive than it was under Clinton or Obama, right? So there's this perception that taxes are always increasing, which is actually just completely untrue. Right. So part of this is just restoring reality to the picture first as a starting point.
And the Republican majority, most of them in Congress, have signed pledges, no new taxes, no new taxes, so they won't vote for them, and they have a majority.
Right, Josh?
I think the reason the carried interest tax treatment survives is that it's actually not that large a tax issue in the big picture. I mean, you say, well, why can't we have a good tax policy? Why can't we tax carried interest properly? Let's say that we do that reform. It'll raise an extra $2 or $3 billion a year, and so instead of a $500 billion federal budget deficit, we're left with a $497 billion federal budget deficit.
Right, but of course that's the reason I raise it, because it's low-hanging fruit, right? I mean, the point is that yes, okay, fine, well, yes. Does it solve the federal deficit? No, but there's
but that's the reason who pays for elections. I mean, let's
Thank you, Heather. I've been leading everybody. I've been leading everybody to the water, but no one wanted to take a drink. Thank you, Heather.
We're talking about democracy now.
We've got. I mean, the link. I mean, my organization was founded on the link between political inequality and economic inequality, and we are sitting here at the absolute pinnacle of seeing how every single time there is a policy that advantages basically the top 1% of the 1%. 1%, which is who donates to elections, who funds the super PACs, who funds individual candidates, you cannot get traction. There was a political, Larry Bartell says that the bottom 30% of the income distribution, their desires, their political desires, have exactly zero impact on their elected officials' outcome.
Well,
Congresswoman, do you feel that?
Well, look
every
at, to her point about elections, with Citizens United, you had one person, Adelson, buying one election in South Carolina, possibly buying an election in Florida. One person donated $5 million to Newt Gingrich. He was $1 million in debt, and literally changed that election in South Carolina. His wife has done the same. And this is, if there was ever a constitutional amendment that we should pass, it's one to roll back Citizens United, because it is allowing this few wealthy people to literally buy elections in America.
Congresswoman, you teed that up perfectly for me, because we actually are going to talk about exactly that issue later in the show. Pulitzer Prize-winning tax and economics reporter David K. Johnson. Stick around. We're going to come back to you when we start talking about Mr. Sheldon Adelson. But our pregame show for tomorrow